Sarah Martinez had always been different from other students at the Mountain Ridge Adventure Academy. While her classmates struggled with basic rock climbing techniques, she seemed to move up the cliff faces like a spider, finding handholds that others couldn't even see. Her instructors often watched in amazement as she completed courses that took others weeks to master in just a few days. The academy was known throughout the region as one of the most challenging outdoor training facilities in the country. Students came from all over the world to test their limits against the rugged terrain of the Colorado Rockies. The courses ranged from basic survival skills to extreme mountain rescue operations, and the dropout rate was notoriously high. Sarah's journey to the academy had been unconventional. Born in a small town in New Mexico, she had lost her sight in a car accident when she was 12 years old. The doctors told her family that she would need to adjust to a completely different way of life. Her parents were devastated, but Sarah refused to let her blindness define her limitations. During her rehabilitation, she discovered that her other senses had become remarkably sharp. She could hear the slightest changes in wind direction, feel vibrations through solid rock that others couldn't detect, and her sense of touch had developed to an almost supernatural level. Physical therapists were amazed at how quickly she adapted to moving through space without sight. By the time she turned 18, Sarah had already completed several challenging hikes and rock climbing courses designed for visually impaired adventurers. But she wanted more. She had heard about Mountain Ridge Adventure Academy from a friend who had attempted their programs and failed. The friend described it as impossible, a place where even experienced outdoor athletes were humbled. When Sarah first contacted the academy, the admissions officer was skeptical. They had never had a blind student before, and the insurance liability alone seemed overwhelming. But Sarah was persistent. She provided references from previous instructors, medical clearances, and even offered to sign additional waivers. After months of back-and-forth correspondence, they finally agreed to let her audit a basic course. The day Sarah arrived at the academy, she could feel the doubt radiating from everyone around her. The other students whispered among themselves, wondering how someone who couldn't see would possibly manage the physical challenges ahead. The instructors were polite but clearly concerned about her safety. Her first instructor was Marcus Thompson, a former Navy SEAL who had been teaching at the academy for over a decade. Marcus had seen thousands of students come through his programs, and he prided himself on being able to assess someone's capabilities within the first hour. When he met Sarah, he was immediately struck by her confidence, but he couldn't shake his worry about her safety. The first course was basic rope work and knot tying. Sarah surprised everyone by completing the exercises faster than most sighted students. Her fingers moved with incredible precision, and she seemed to understand the physics of rope tension and weight distribution intuitively. Marcus found himself having to create more challenging variations just to keep her engaged. As the weeks progressed, Sarah continued to excel. She mastered rappelling techniques that typically took students months to learn. Her ability to read the rock face through touch was unlike anything the instructors had ever witnessed. She could identify the quality of different types of rock, predict where fractures might occur, and find the most secure anchor points with remarkable accuracy. Word about Sarah's abilities began to spread throughout the academy. Students who had initially been skeptical started asking her for advice. She became known for her ability to help others overcome their fears, particularly those who were struggling with height anxiety or confidence issues. Marcus began to realize that Sarah wasn't just keeping up with the other students, she was surpassing most of them. Her unique approach to problem solving, combined with her heightened senses, gave her advantages that sighted climbers didn't possess. She never relied on visual cues that could be misleading, instead trusting her other senses completely. The academy had a tradition of advanced students taking on increasingly difficult challenges. There were rumors of a secret course that only the most elite students ever attempted. It was whispered about in the dormitories late at night, described as the ultimate test of skill, endurance, and mental toughness. Sarah learned about this mysterious course from her roommate, Jennifer, who had been at the academy for over a year. Jennifer explained that it was called the Gauntlet, a course so difficult that it had never been completed by any student in the academy's 15-year history. The instructors used it as a motivational tool, telling students that it represented the theoretical limit of what was possible. The Gauntlet supposedly combined elements from every discipline taught at the academy. technical rock climbing, wilderness survival, navigation, rescue operations, and psychological endurance challenges. Students who had attempted it described it as a multi-day ordeal that pushed participants to their absolute breaking point. Marcus had mentioned the gauntlet only once to Sarah, and only to explain why certain areas of the mountain were off-limits to students. He told her that even he had never completed it, and that it was designed more as a research project than an actual course. The academy used it to study the limits of human performance under extreme conditions, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night she lay in her bunk listening to the mountain winds, imagining what challenges the gauntlet might contain. She began asking subtle questions during her regular courses, trying to piece together information about its location and requirements. Her instructors noticed her growing interest in more advanced techniques. She started requesting additional training sessions, pushing herself harder than any student they had ever taught. Marcus began to suspect that Sarah was planning something, but he couldn't quite figure out what. The other students watched Sarah's progress with a mixture of admiration and concern. Some worried that she was pushing too hard, too fast. Others were inspired by her determination and began training harder themselves. The atmosphere at the academy became more intense as Sarah's presence challenged everyone to reconsider their own limitations. As Sarah's skills continued to develop at an unprecedented rate, the instructors faced a dilemma they had never encountered before. They had a student who was not only exceeding all expectations, but who seemed to be approaching the theoretical limits of what their courses could offer. The question became not whether Sarah could handle more advanced challenges, but whether the academy was prepared for what she might attempt next. The academy's director, Dr. Elizabeth Kane, had been watching Sarah's progress with growing interest and concern. Dr. Kane had founded Mountain Ridge Adventure Academy after a distinguished career in extreme sports psychology, and she had never encountered a student quite like Sarah. The young woman's rapid advancement through the program was unprecedented, but it was her attitude that truly set her apart. Most students at the academy were driven by a desire to prove themselves or overcome personal challenges. Sarah seemed motivated by something deeper, a genuine curiosity about the limits of human capability. She approached each new challenge not with the desperation of someone trying to prove their worth, but with the methodical precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. Dr. Kane decided it was time to have a private conversation with Sarah. She invited her to her office one evening, after the regular training sessions had ended. The office was located in the academy's main building, overlooking the valley where students practiced their basic skills before moving on to the more dangerous mountain courses. When Sarah arrived, Dr. Kane was struck by how the young woman moved through the unfamiliar space. She didn't hesitate or fumble around like most people would in a new environment. Instead, she seemed to map the room instantly, her head tilting slightly as she processed acoustic information that others would never notice. Dr. Kane explained that she had been following Sarah's progress closely and was impressed by her achievements. She also shared some of the history of the academy, including the development of the Gauntlet course. Unlike the rumors that circulated among students, Dr. Kane revealed the true purpose behind the course. The Gauntlet had been designed as part of a research project funded by various government agencies and private organizations interested in understanding human performance under extreme conditions. The course was meant to be impossible, not just difficult, but actually beyond the limits of human capability. It was a control experiment, designed to establish baseline data about where those limits actually existed. Over the years, the Academy's best students and even professional athletes and military personnel had attempted the Gauntlet. Some had come close to completing certain sections, but no one had ever finished the entire course. The record holder was a former Olympic athlete who had completed approximately 60% of the challenges before being forced to withdraw due to exhaustion and dehydration. Dr. Kane explained that the course consisted of 5 major sections, each designed to test different aspects of human performance. The first section focused on technical climbing skills, requiring participants to navigate a series of increasingly difficult rock faces using only basic equipment. The second section tested survival skills, dropping participants in a remote area with minimal supplies and requiring them to reach a specific location within a set time frame. The third section was perhaps the most psychological challenging. involving a series of problem-solving exercises that had to be completed while under severe physical stress. Participants were required to solve complex puzzles and make critical decisions while exhausted, dehydrated, and operating on minimal sleep. The fourth section tested rescue and emergency response skills. Participants had to locate and assist simulated accident victims in various dangerous scenarios, all while managing their own depleted resources. The final section was a race against time, requiring participants to navigate to the finish point using only basic navigation tools while their bodies were pushed to the absolute limit. What made the course truly impossible was not just the individual difficulty of each section, but the cumulative effect of attempting them all in sequence. The human body and mind simply couldn't maintain peak performance through such sustained stress. Even the most elite athletes found themselves making critical errors by the third or fourth section. Sarah listened to this explanation with growing excitement rather than discouragement. When Dr. Kane finished, Sarah asked a question that caught the director off guard. Has anyone ever attempted the course without using sight as their primary sense? Dr. Kane admitted that they had never considered how visual impairment might affect performance on the gauntlet. In fact, the course had been designed with the assumption that participants would rely heavily on visual information. This conversation sparked an idea that would change everything. Over the following weeks, Dr. Kane found herself reconsidering the fundamental assumptions behind the gauntlet course. She began to wonder whether the course's impossibility was actually based on the limitations of sighted individuals rather than true human limitations. Perhaps someone who had already learned to navigate the world without vision might approach the challenges from an entirely different perspective. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her regular training with renewed focus. She began specifically requesting exercises that would prepare her for the types of challenges Dr. Kane had described. Marcus noticed that her training had become more systematic, as if she was preparing for something specific rather than just improving her general skills. Sarah started spending her free time studying the Academy's topographical maps, running her fingers over the raised contours to build a mental model of the terrain. She practiced navigation exercises using only compass and altimeter, timing herself as she moved through increasingly complex routes. Her fellow students began to suspect that she was planning something ambitious. The other instructors at the Academy were divided in their opinions about Sarah. Some admired her determination and believed she could achieve things that no one had thought possible. Others worried that her ambitions were dangerous and that she might be setting herself up for serious injury or worse. Marcus found himself in the difficult position of being Sarah's primary instructor while also being responsible for her safety. He had come to respect her abilities immensely, but he also understood the true dangers of the mountain environment. He had seen too many capable people make fatal errors when they overestimated their abilities. During one of their regular climbing sessions, Marcus decided to test Sarah's limits more directly. He set up a series of challenging routes that required not just technical skill, but also the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. He added time constraints and simulated emergency scenarios to see how she would respond. Sarah's performance exceeded even Marcus's high expectations. She seemed to thrive under pressure, becoming more focused and precise rather than making the mistakes that stress typically induced in other students. Her problem-solving approach was unlike anything he had seen before. She seemed to consider possibilities that sighted climbers never even noticed. After several weeks of these intense training sessions, Marcus realized that Sarah wasn't just planning to attempt the gauntlet, she was planning to complete it. The thought both excited and terrified him. On one hand, he believed she might actually have a chance to succeed where others had failed. On the other hand, he knew that failure on the gauntlet could be fatal. The Academy's insurance policies and safety protocols had never anticipated a situation like this. Dr. Kane found herself in lengthy discussions with legal advisors and medical experts, trying to determine whether they could responsibly allow Sarah to attempt the course. The liability issues were complex, but the potential research value was enormous. As news of Sarah's possible attempt spread through the Academy, the atmosphere became charged with anticipation and tension. Students and instructors found themselves taking sides, some supporting her right to attempt the challenge, others arguing that it was too dangerous regardless of her abilities. The debate ultimately forced everyone at the academy to confront fundamental questions about risk, limitation, and the nature of human potential. Sarah's presence had transformed what was supposed to be an impossible course into a very real possibility, and no one was quite sure what that might mean for the future of extreme sports training. The decision to allow Sarah to attempt the gauntlet came after weeks of heated debate among the Academy's board of directors. Dr. Kane had presented extensive documentation of Sarah's abilities, medical clearances from specialists, and revised safety protocols that would minimize risks without compromising the integrity of the challenge. The final decision came down to a simple question. Did they have the right to deny someone the opportunity to test their limits simply because those limits had never been tested before? Sarah spent the month leading up to her attempt in intensive preparation. She worked with specialists to develop modified techniques for the challenges that had been designed around visual navigation. She memorized detailed topographical information about every section of the course, building three-dimensional mental maps that would guide her through areas she had never physically explored. The Academy brought in additional experts to help with her preparation. A former military survival instructor taught her advanced techniques for conserving energy and managing resources during extended operations. A sports psychologist helped her develop mental strategies for maintaining focus during the psychological challenges that were designed to break down participants' decision-making abilities. Marcus became her primary training partner during this period, and their relationship evolved beyond that of instructor and student. He found himself learning from Sarah's unique approaches to problem-solving, and he began to understand that her blindness wasn't just something she had overcome, it was actually an advantage in many situations. During one training session, Marcus blindfolded himself to better understand Sarah's perspective. The experience was humbling and enlightening. He realized that sighted people were often overwhelmed by visual information that could be misleading or distracting. Sarah had learned to focus on more reliable sensory input that provided better information about structural integrity, weather conditions, and spatial relationships. The Academy's other students followed Sarah's preparation with intense interest. Many requested permission to observe her training sessions, and several asked if they could participate in modified versions of her exercises. Her approach to training became a subject of study in itself, as instructors realized that her techniques could benefit sighted students as well. 3 weeks before the scheduled attempt, Sarah made an announcement that shocked everyone. She intended to complete the gauntlet while wearing a blindfold. The statement seemed impossible to understand at first. Why would someone who was already blind need to wear a blindfold? Sarah explained her reasoning during a meeting with Dr. Kane and the senior instructors. She had realized that the gauntlet's designers had assumed that participants would rely heavily on vision, and many of the challenges included visual elements that were meant to confuse or mislead. By wearing a blindfold, she would be making a statement about the fundamental assumptions behind the course design. More importantly, Sarah had discovered during her preparation that she occasionally found herself trying to use her limited light perception in ways that actually interfered with her more reliable senses. The blindfold would force her to rely completely on the sensory skills that had made her so successful in her training. The announcement created a media sensation that the Academy had not anticipated. News outlets picked up the story of the blind woman who planned to complete an impossible course while blindfolded, and reporters began arriving at the Academy to document the attempt. Dr. Kane found herself managing not just the logistical challenges of the attempt but also the pressure of public attention. Sarah seemed unaffected by the media attention. She continued her training regimen with the same methodical focus she had always shown. If anything, the additional pressure seemed to sharpen her concentration rather than distract her from her goals. The week before the attempt, Sarah underwent extensive medical testing to establish baseline measurements for the research component of the project. Scientists attached monitoring equipment that would track her vital signs, stress hormones, and neurological responses throughout the challenge. The data would provide unprecedented insight into human performance under extreme conditions. Dr. Kane assembled a team of medical professionals and emergency responders who would monitor Sarah's progress throughout the attempt. Safety protocols were established that would allow for immediate intervention if her condition became dangerous, though everyone understood that such intervention would mean the end of her attempt. The night before the gauntlet attempt, Sarah sat alone in her dormitory room, running through mental rehearsals of each section of the course. She had spent months preparing for this moment, but she understood that all the preparation in the world couldn't eliminate the fundamental uncertainty of the challenge ahead. Her roommate Jennifer found her there in the darkness, sitting perfectly still in what appeared to be meditation. Jennifer had watched Sarah's preparation with a mixture of admiration and worry, and she felt compelled to say something before the attempt began. Jennifer asked Sarah why she was doing this, why she felt the need to take such an enormous risk when she had already proven herself capable of things that amazed everyone at the academy. Sarah's answer was simple but profound. She wanted to know what was possible. Sarah explained that throughout her life, people had told her what she couldn't do because of her blindness. She had spent years proving those limitations wrong, but she had always wondered what the actual limits were, not the assumed ones. The gauntlet represented the ultimate test of those assumptions. The conversation continued late into the night, touching on topics of risk, achievement, and the nature of human potential. Jennifer came to understand that for Sarah, this wasn't about proving anything to other people. It was about answering fundamental questions about what human beings were capable of when they refused to accept conventional limitations. As dawn approached, Sarah began her final preparations. She ate a carefully planned meal designed to provide sustained energy throughout the multi-day challenge. She checked and rechecked her equipment, running her hands over every piece of gear to ensure she knew its exact location and condition. The medical team attached the monitoring equipment that would track her progress and condition throughout the attempt. The devices were designed to be as unobtrusive as possible, while still providing comprehensive data about her physiological responses to the challenges ahead. Marcus conducted a final briefing, reviewing the safety protocols and communication procedures that would be used during the attempt. He also shared some personal thoughts about what Sarah was about to undertake, acknowledging both his admiration for her courage and his concern for her safety. Dr. Kane addressed the assembled crowd of students, instructors, researchers, and media representatives who had gathered to witness the attempt. She emphasized the serious nature of what was about to unfold and requested that everyone respect the safety protocols and maintain the focus necessary for Sarah to concentrate on the challenges ahead. As the sun rose over the mountain peaks, Sarah stood at the starting point of the gauntlet course. Wearing her blindfold and carrying the minimum equipment allowed by the course rules, she appeared calm and focused, showing none of the nervous energy that typically affected participants at this moment. The first section of the course stretched out above her, a series of technical climbing challenges that had defeated many of the world's most accomplished mountaineers. But Sarah approached it with confidence born of months of preparation and a lifetime of learning to trust her non-visual senses. The moment had arrived for Sarah to begin her attempt to accomplish what everyone said was impossible. As she placed her hands on the rock face for the first time, she was about to discover whether her unique approach to the world would be enough to overcome a challenge designed to be beyond human capability. The first section of the gauntlet began with what appeared to be a straightforward rock climbing challenge, but appearances were deliberately deceiving. The course designers had created a series of routes that looked manageable from the ground, but contained hidden difficulties that had trapped previous participants. Loose rock, false handholds, and unstable anchor points were positioned to catch climbers who relied too heavily on visual assessment. Sarah approached the rock face methodically, running her hands along the stone to assess its quality and structure. Where previous participants had been misled by visual cues, Sarah's tactile examination revealed the true nature of each potential handhold. She could feel the subtle vibrations that indicated loose rock, and her fingers detected hairline fractures that were invisible to the eye. Marcus watched from below as Sarah began her ascent, noting how different her technique was from anything he had ever taught. She moved slowly and deliberately, testing each hold before committing her weight to it. Her progress seemed inefficient compared to the rapid climbing style that most students learned, but Marcus realized that her approach was actually more reliable than conventional techniques. As Sarah climbed higher, the monitoring equipment began providing data that surprised the medical team. Her heart rate remained remarkably steady, and her stress hormone levels were actually lower than what they had measured during her practice sessions. Dr. Kane realized that Sarah was more comfortable with this challenge than she had been during training because she was finally able to rely completely on her primary senses. The first major obstacle was a section known as the false summit, where the apparent route led to a dead end that had trapped numerous previous participants. Climbers typically wasted hours trying to find a way forward from this position before being forced to retreat and find an alternative route. Sarah never even approached the false summit. Her hands told her that the rock quality deteriorated along the obvious route, and she could hear the way wind patterns changed around the dead-end area. Instead of following the visual path that had misled others, she found a narrow chimney that led to the actual route continuation. Her progress through this section was faster than any previous participant had managed. The climbing section concluded with a traverse across an exposed cliff face where participants had to cross using only small handholds while a strong mountain wind threatened to throw them off balance. Previous participants had struggled with the psychological pressure of looking down at the valley far below. But Sarah experienced no such distraction. She crossed the traverse with remarkable efficiency, her body naturally adjusting to the wind patterns that she could feel and hear, but that sighted climbers often didn't notice until they were already off balance. The medical team noted that her breathing remained controlled and rhythmic throughout this section, indicating a level of calm that was unprecedented in gauntlet participants. Completing the first section in record time, Sarah faced the beginning of the survival challenge. Participants were dropped at a remote location with minimal supplies and had to reach a checkpoint several miles away within a specific time frame. The route involved navigation through dense forest, crossing a fast-moving stream and climbing over a rocky ridge. The survival section had defeated more participants than any other part of the gauntlet. The combination of limited resources, time pressure, and navigational challenges typically overwhelmed even experienced outdoors enthusiasts. Many participants became lost, running out of time and energy before reaching the checkpoint. Sarah's approach to this section revealed the true extent of her preparation. She had spent weeks studying topographical maps and weather patterns for this exact route. She understood the terrain in ways that went beyond simple navigation. She knew where to find water sources, which areas provided the best shelter, and how to move efficiently through the landscape. Her navigation technique was based on a combination of compass readings, slope analysis, and careful attention to environmental cues that sighted people typically overlooked. She could determine her location by feeling the texture of different soil types, listening to how water flowed through various terrain features, and noting how vegetation changed with elevation and exposure. The stream crossing presented a particular challenge, as the current was stronger than most participants expected. Previous attempts had failed when exhausted participants miscalculated the river's power and were swept downstream. Sarah spent several minutes analyzing the water flow patterns through sound and by testing the current with a walking stick before selecting her crossing point. She chose a location that others had overlooked because it appeared more difficult from a visual perspective. However, Sarah's analysis revealed that the bottom was more stable and the current less treacherous than at the obvious crossing points. Her crossing was methodical and safe, demonstrating once again how her non-visual assessment techniques provided better information than sight alone. As Sarah moved through the forest section, her pace remained steady while her efficiency actually improved. She seemed to be gaining energy rather than losing it, a phenomenon that puzzled the medical monitoring team. Dr. Kane theorized that Sarah was experiencing a kind of flow state that was impossible for sighted participants to achieve because they were constantly processing visual information that created anxiety and confusion. The ridge climb that concluded the survival section typically exhausted participants just when they needed their remaining energy for the psychological challenges ahead. The combination of technical climbing after hours of hiking and navigation had broken the will of many otherwise capable individuals. Sarah approached the ridge climb with the same methodical technique she had used throughout the survival section. She maintained her efficient pace, conserving energy by choosing routes that required less physical effort, rather than the obvious paths that looked easier, but actually demanded more strength. Reaching the survival section checkpoint ahead of schedule, Sarah demonstrated something that had never been recorded in gauntlet history. She was actually in better condition than when she had started. The medical data showed that her body had adapted to the sustained effort in ways that defied conventional understanding of human physiology under extreme stress. The psychological challenges section was designed to test decision-making abilities under severe stress. Participants had to solve complex puzzles and make critical choices, while their bodies and minds were pushed to their limits. The challenges included mathematical problems, spatial reasoning tests, and ethical dilemmas that had to be completed within strict time constraints. What made this section particularly difficult was that it came after participants had already been pushed to exhaustion by the previous challenges. The course designers understood that cognitive function deteriorated under physical stress, and they had calibrated the psychological challenges to be just beyond what an exhausted person could handle. Sarah entered this section with clear mental focus that surprised everyone monitoring her progress. Her unique relationship with stress seemed to be serving her well. She appeared to thrive under pressure, rather than being overwhelmed by it. The psychological challenges that had broken other participants became puzzles that engaged her problem-solving abilities. Her approach to the cognitive challenges revealed another aspect of her unique skill set. Years of navigating the world without sight had taught her to process information systematically and to trust her analytical abilities even when conventional cues were unavailable. She worked through the problems with patience and precision, showing none of the panic or frustration that typically affected participants at this stage. As Sarah moved through the psychological challenges section, it became clear that she was not just surviving the gauntlet, she was mastering it. Her performance was redefining what the course meant and forcing everyone to reconsider their assumptions about human limitations. The rescue simulation section of the gauntlet had been designed to test participants' ability to function effectively when others depended on their performance. After being pushed to their physical and mental limits, participants were required to locate and assist multiple simulated accident victims in various dangerous scenarios. The section tested not only technical rescue skills, but also the ability to make life or death decisions while operating under extreme stress. Previous participants had typically reached this section in a state of near exhaustion, making critical errors that would have been fatal in real rescue situations. The combination of time pressure, physical demands, and the psychological weight of responsibility for others had proven too much for even the most experienced rescue professionals. Sarah approached the rescue section with a level of energy and focus that defied all previous gauntlet data. The medical monitoring team was recording physiological readings that seemed almost impossible, given the sustained stress she had been under for nearly 2 days. Her heart rate variability indicated a state of calm alertness that emergency responders trained for years to achieve. The first rescue scenario involved locating a simulated accident victim in a collapsed cave system. Participants had to navigate through unstable terrain while carrying rescue equipment and then perform technical rope work to extract the victim safely. The scenario was designed to overwhelm participants, with multiple simultaneous challenges requiring both physical skill and complex decision-making. Most previous participants had become confused by the visual complexity of the cave environment, struggling to assess structural stability while managing their equipment and planning the rescue approach. The darkness of the cave had been particularly disorienting for sighted participants, forcing them to work in conditions where their primary sense provided limited information. For Sarah, the cave environment was familiar territory. She moved through the unstable passages with confidence, her hands reading the rock structure in ways that revealed information invisible to sighted rescuers. She could detect subtle changes in airflow that indicated structural weaknesses, and her experience with rope work in challenging conditions served her well in the confined space. Her approach to the technical rescue work demonstrated the culmination of her unique skill set. While previous participants had struggled to manage multiple ropes and anchor points in the dim cave environment, Sarah's tactile expertise allowed her to work efficiently, even in complete darkness. Her understanding of rope physics and load distribution was intuitive rather than intellectual, resulting in rescue setups that were both faster and more secure than those attempted by sighted participants. The second rescue scenario took place on a steep mountainside where a simulated climber had fallen and was trapped on a narrow ledge. The rescue required participants to rappel down a cliff face, provide medical assistance, and then conduct a complex technical raise to bring the victim to safety. Weather conditions included strong winds and intermittent rain that made the operation particularly treacherous. This scenario had ended more gauntlet attempts than any other single challenge. The combination of technical difficulty, environmental hazards, and time pressure had proven overwhelming for participants who were already operating at the edge of their capabilities. Several rescue professionals had been forced to withdraw from the course at this point when they realized they were making errors that could be fatal. Sarah's performance in this scenario showcased abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Her rappel down the cliff face was executed with precision that impressed even Marcus, who was monitoring from a safe position nearby. She seemed to anticipate wind gusts before they hit, adjusting her position and technique to maintain control in conditions that had defeated others. Working with the simulated victim on the narrow ledge, Sarah demonstrated medical skills that had been honed through her unique sensory abilities. Her assessment of the victim's condition was more thorough than typical, because she relied on tactile examination techniques that provided information often missed by visual assessment. Her ability to work efficiently in the cramped conditions while managing multiple pieces of equipment was extraordinary. The technical raise that concluded this scenario required Sarah to construct a complex pulley system while managing the victim's safety and her own position on the cliff face. Previous participants had typically struggled with this challenge because they became overwhelmed by the visual complexity of the rope systems while trying to monitor the victim and environmental conditions. Simultaneously, Sarah's approach demonstrated the practical advantages of her non-visual technique. She could feel the tension and load distribution throughout the entire rope system, allowing her to optimize the mechanical advantage while ensuring safety margins that sighted participants often miscalculated. Her ability to work by feel rather than sight actually provided better information about the system's performance. The final rescue scenario was perhaps the most psychologically challenging. A multi-victim incident requiring Sarah to prioritize limited resources while working against severe time constraints. The scenario was designed to test not only technical skills, but also the ability to make difficult ethical decisions under extreme pressure. 3 simulated victims were positioned in different locations, each requiring different types of assistance and presenting different levels of risk to the rescuer. Participants had to assess the situations, prioritize their efforts, and execute multiple rescues while managing their own depleted resources. The scenario was calibrated so that saving all 3 victims was theoretically possible but practically beyond what an exhausted participant could achieve. Previous participants had typically become paralyzed by the complexity of the decision-making required, or they had made choices that resulted in simulated fatalities. The psychological pressure of choosing which victims to save first had proven as challenging as the technical aspects of the rescues themselves. Sarah approached this scenario with a systematic analysis that demonstrated remarkable clarity of thought given the circumstances. She quickly assessed each situation using her enhanced sensory abilities, gathering information about victim conditions and environmental hazards more efficiently than previous participants had managed. Her decision-making process was logical and methodical, showing no signs of the panic or hesitation that had affected others. Her execution of the multiple rescues was a masterclass in efficient resource management and technical skill. She moved between the different scenarios with purpose and precision, adapting her techniques to the specific requirements of each situation while maintaining awareness of her own condition and capabilities. The medical monitoring team recorded data during the section that would later become the subject of extensive research. Sarah's stress hormone levels remained stable throughout the rescue scenarios, and her cognitive function tests showed no signs of the deterioration typically seen in participants at this stage of the gauntlet. Completing the rescue section successfully, Sarah had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of the course. She had not only survived challenges designed to be beyond human capability, but she had excelled at them while demonstrating techniques and approaches that challenged fundamental assumptions about human performance under extreme conditions. With only the final navigation section remaining, Sarah stood on the verge of achieving what everyone had said was impossible. But the last section of the gauntlet was designed to be the ultimate test, requiring participants to navigate to the finish point using minimal equipment while their bodies and minds were pushed to absolute failure. Even with her remarkable performance so far, the greatest challenge still lay ahead. The final section of the gauntlet was known simply as the Crucible among the Academy's instructors. It was designed to strip away everything except the most basic human will to survive. Participants were given minimal navigation equipment and had to reach the finish point across treacherous terrain, while their bodies operated on the edge of complete failure. The section had never been completed by anyone, and most participants were evacuated for medical reasons before reaching the halfway point. Sarah entered the crucible after 3 days of sustained physical and mental challenges that would have hospitalized most people. The medical team monitoring her vital signs was struggling to understand how she was still functioning at such a high level. Her body should have been shutting down, but instead she appeared to be operating in a state that transcended normal human limitations. The navigation challenge required her to cross 15 miles of the most difficult terrain the mountain had to offer. The route included steep ascents over loose scree, dangerous traverses across exposed cliff faces, and descents through areas where a single misstep could result in a fatal fall. Weather conditions were deliberately harsh, with freezing temperatures and high winds that made every movement a battle for survival. Previous participants had typically become disoriented within the first few miles, as exhaustion and environmental stress overwhelmed their ability to navigate accurately. Many had wandered off course, becoming lost in terrain where rescue operations were extremely dangerous. Others had simply collapsed from exhaustion, their bodies finally succumbing to the accumulated stress of the previous challenges. Sarah's approach to the crucible demonstrated the culmination of everything she had learned about pushing beyond perceived limitations. She moved across the treacherous terrain with a rhythm and efficiency that seemed to defy the conditions around her. Her navigation was precise and confident, guided by techniques that went far beyond simple compass work. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the mountain environment through her enhanced senses. Changes in wind patterns told her about terrain features ahead. The sound of distant water helped her maintain her bearings when conventional navigation became difficult. The texture of rock and soil under her feet provided information about elevation changes and geological features that confirmed her position. As Sarah progressed through the crucible, something remarkable began to happen. Instead of gradually wearing down like previous participants, she seemed to be entering a state of enhanced performance that pushed her capabilities beyond anything she had previously achieved. The medical monitoring equipment was recording data that challenged fundamental understanding of human physiology under extreme stress. Dr. Kane, monitoring from the command center, realized she was witnessing something that would revolutionize sports science and human performance research. Sarah was demonstrating that the assumed limits of human capability were actually limitations imposed by conventional approaches to extreme challenges. Her unique relationship with sensory information and stress response was revealing possibilities that no one had imagined. The most treacherous section of the crucible was known as the Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge with 1,000-foot drops on both sides that had to be crossed during the worst weather conditions. Previous participants who had reached this point were typically so exhausted and disoriented that they couldn't safely attempt the crossing. The combination of extreme exposure, high winds, and the psychological pressure of the dramatic consequences of error had proven insurmountable. Sarah approached the Devil's Backbone as dawn was breaking on her 4th day in the mountains. She had been moving continuously for over 70 hours, operating on minimal food and water while maintaining focus and physical performance that defied medical understanding. The wind was howling across the ridge with gusts that could easily knock a person off balance, and ice made every step treacherous. Her crossing of the Devil's Backbone became the stuff of legend among everyone who witnessed it. She moved across the narrow ridge with deliberate precision, her enhanced balance and spatial awareness allowing her to maintain stability in conditions that would challenge even fresh, rested climbers. Her ability to feel wind patterns through her entire body helped her anticipate gusts and adjust her position accordingly. Marcus, monitoring her progress through high-powered binoculars from a distant observation point, found himself holding his breath as Sarah navigated the most dangerous sections of the ridge. Her technique was unlike anything taught in conventional mountaineering courses, yet it was clearly more effective than traditional approaches. Under these extreme conditions, the psychological pressure that had broken previous participants seemed to have no effect on Sarah. The dramatic exposure and potential consequences of error that terrified sighted climbers were simply environmental factors for her to analyze and manage. Her relationship with fear and risk had been fundamentally shaped by years of navigating a world that others found threatening, and these skills served her perfectly in the crucible. Beyond the Devil's Backbone, the final miles of the crucible descended through a boulder field, where previous participants had typically become trapped or injured. The combination of unstable rock, exhaustion, and the psychological pressure of being so close to completion had resulted in critical errors that ended attempts when success seemed within reach. Sarah's movement through the boulder field demonstrated the full extent of her unique capabilities. Her ability to assess rock stability through touch and sound allowed her to find safe routes that others had missed. Her understanding of balance and weight distribution helped her navigate terrain that had defeated climbers with decades of experience. As she approached the final checkpoint, Sarah was moving with energy and focus that seemed impossible, given what she had endured. The medical team was recording physiological data that would become the subject of research for years to come. She had not just survived the gauntlet. She had redefined what human beings were capable of achieving under extreme conditions. The moment Sarah reached the finish point, still wearing her blindfold after 4 days of challenges designed to be impossible, she accomplished something that changed everyone's understanding of human potential. She had completed the gauntlet not despite her blindness, but because her unique approach to perceiving and interacting with the world gave her capabilities that sighted people simply didn't possess. The celebration that followed was subdued by the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Students, instructors, and researchers struggled to process the implications of Sarah's achievement. She had proven that the course wasn't impossible after all, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that human limitations were often assumptions rather than actual boundaries. Dr. Kane approached Sarah at the finish line, finding her sitting quietly despite the chaos of celebration around her. When asked how she felt about completing the impossible course, Sarah's response was characteristically thoughtful. She explained that she had never seen the gauntlet as impossible, only as a series of challenges that required different approaches than conventional wisdom suggested. The media coverage that followed Sarah's achievement brought international attention to the Academy and sparked worldwide discussions about disability, human potential, and the nature of limitation itself. Sarah became a symbol of possibility for people who had been told what they couldn't achieve. But she remained focused on the practical implications of what she had learned. In the months that followed, Sarah worked with the Academy to develop new training methods based on her techniques. Her approaches to navigation, risk assessment, and performance under stress were integrated into the curriculum, benefiting all students regardless of their sensory abilities. The gauntlet itself was redesigned to incorporate lessons learned from her successful completion. Marcus, reflecting on Sarah's achievement, realized that she had taught him more about human potential than decades of traditional instruction had revealed. Her success had forced everyone at the Academy to question their assumptions about what was possible and to develop more inclusive approaches to extreme performance training. Sarah's story became more than just an account of personal achievement. It became proof that the barriers people face are often created by limited thinking rather than actual impossibilities. Her completion of the gauntlet while blindfolded demonstrated that with different approaches, proper preparation, and the courage to challenge assumptions, human beings could achieve things that seemed beyond the realm of possibility. The instructor who had once said that no one could beat the course had been proven wrong, but in the best possible way. Sarah's achievement opened new possibilities for everyone who had ever been told that their goals were impossible, showing that sometimes the only real limitation is the willingness to imagine and pursue what others believe cannot be done.